I think first of all I'd like to extend my thanks and gratitude. We're delighted to be running this event today in partnership with BRE, and thank you to Arup for hosting the session and all the speakers as well. And I thought it was a very, very good, very useful session at the start to set the scene. The first session was very interesting, and one of the key points that was picked on was that health and wellbeing is a personal issue. It's very personal to all of us. It affects all of us, where we work, how we use the buildings that we operate in. So I'm going to start by highlighting some of my experience. So I graduated in the late 90s from university and went to work in the automotive industry. This was my office. It had no outside windows. The air quality was shocking because there were plants and machinery. It was actually a metal cutting factory, so there's lots of lubricant in the air. It was dusty, it was noisy, and the job was great. I was an environmental advisor. I'd got where I wanted to be. It was close to home, so I was able to live at home while I got my feet under the table. Lots of experience. But the business actually didn't know what to do with me. They didn't know where to put me. So I got dumped in the production manager's office, which is this. And it was hard work. It was really tough on me. I'd get home from a day's hard work, infused at the start, but very, very tired. And I'd end up falling asleep. So I'd get home, I'd fall asleep. I'd then have my dinner, wake up and not be able to go to sleep at night. And this built and it was quite a pressure on me, I think, and down to the quality of the environment that I was working in, and to the point that my mother and father are teachers, or were teachers, they're retired now, and they'd always said to me, "Never, Paul, never be a teacher. It's a dreadful career. There's far too much pressure. You don't want to go down that route." 6 months into my new job, my dad sat down with me and he said, "Paul, you know this isn't working for you. Have you thought about teaching?" So their frame of reference was very limited, but clearly my father saw the impact that looking back and thinking back was the pressure of working in an office that didn't work for me. So that's a bit of my history, and we'll come back to where I sit and where my experience of occupation of offices later on. But I want to pick up on what's good practice. And if you were to use an internet search engine to look for health and well-being in offices, these are some of the typical images that you come across. So, and we've seen some of them, and they are fantastic. So lots of open space, lots of different areas for people to break out, to eat separately from their desk, to have separate informal meetings, lots of natural light, good air quality, although obviously from photos you can't see the air quality. Biophilia, plants, animals, not animals. And that's great, but where are we in reality? So does this reflect where the industry is? And the answer is yes, for a select few corporate occupiers who have the money and the time and the effort to fit out buildings like this. But on a typical day-to-day basis, I visit and I audit from a sustainability perspective. I visit office buildings, and this is what a typical office building looks like when I go in. It's pitch black or very dark, certainly in the middle. The air conditioning systems, which are in the roof, are not connected to one another. They're simple split systems, so you've got people fighting over whether it's too hot or too cold. And you probably can't see from there, but the people in there are miserable. They look grumpy. And that's probably because I'm stood at the end of their office taking a photo and they've never met me before. But it is clear. And this office, they were a professional service organisation. They recognised that they wanted to do something and they put a couple of trees in. Is that really health and wellbeing in the office place? This is another example. Here, slightly better, more natural light, but this company had chosen to put all the desks in the central core of the space. So the area where it gets natural light, there were the walkways. So you could walk round in light, and then you had to sit down in the dark. So directly under the AC, dumping cold air or hot air or warm air down on people's necks. So what can we do about operational space? What can we do about it? Well, the ideal time is fit out, is refurbishment, but we don't always have that opportunity, and certainly the types of occupier that I've just shown you there, they're in there for a long run. They can't deal with things straight away. So we need to think about what we can do, how we can support. And the first thing is let's question, let's raise the questions. There's been quite a bit of this already. But what do users want? And this is an important point, that occupiers, even in the office environment, use their office space differently. So how are they using the space? What do they want it for? And what are their expectations? And then we can measure, so we can measure air quality, we can measure CO2, we can measure temperature, and then the outputs as well, the economics, the lag indicators, if you like, how is it having an effect? And there's quite a lot of case study information out there that demonstrates that of the positive impact of health and well-being in offices. There's then the next step is to make changes. So I separate these into internal changes and external changes. So the internal changes are things you could do about your office space, or occupiers that we work with can do about their office space straight away. And you can think about things like layout, so simply using the space better. Think about where the air conditioning vents are. Don't plonk the desk straight under there. Think about the BMS, the building management system controls and setting. First of all, is it commissioned correctly? Is it set up? Is it working? And is it in line with how the tenants use their buildings? We can look at changes to the lighting, which is a relatively cost-effective way of making changes. So there's more to come on this from Phillips in a presentation later today, so I'm not going to talk too much about that. We're going to talk about a planting strategy, and you don't have to be a big organisation to think about how you use plants to liven up, to freshen up the air quality in an office. We are a relatively small practice. We've got about 20 staff, and 2 years ago we bought planting trays into the desks to get people to think about it, and gave our staff the opportunity to contribute and participate in this exercise. And finally, the final bullet point here is one of procedural control. So health and well-being, it's not just about the office space, and we shouldn't forget that. You've got to think about how people work. It's no good creating breakout areas, fantastic breakout areas where people can theoretically sit down and have lunch and enjoy their lunch away from their desk, if there's a cultural expectation that people work 60, 70 hours a week and sit at the desk and wolf down a sandwich really quickly whilst still working. So procedural operational activity is also important. And then external change. Now, this is easier for some organisations than others, but the vast majority of the occupiers of building space do not have their own canteens, do not have their own restaurants, do not have their own ability to feed their staff. People go out to get a sandwich. So how do you address that? People don't have a gym on site in the majority of cases. How do you support fitness, support nourishment? It's about partnership, I think. It's about engaging. It's about understanding what is in place, where the opportunities exist, and working with others in the local community. So some of the key points that the Crown made earlier about placemaking, about engagement, resonate here. And I think one of the important points is to remember there's a feedback. So Deming was highlighted earlier, the Deming cycle, a plan, do, check, act cycle of understanding where you are, planning, implementing those changes, measuring their effectiveness, and then feeding back to continually improve performance is an important aspect here. This is a wall-mounted air conditioning control, and on, off, up, down is the title. It's evidence that things aren't working, and things aren't working from a plant and equipment perspective, but also from an occupier perspective. I think there are two key issues in the running of a building that I see on a regular basis. One is that the kit is not set up correctly, or that the facilities managers and the building managers don't actually understand how to use it and how to support people who occupy that space. I think that's something that it's an environmental issue, but it's also a health and well-being issue. We've got to help, and we've got to work with our managing agents and our building managers to understand and support that process. The other one is tenant engagement, is understanding and working with the tenants to get them to figure out how their space works. And this is an air conditioning unit that's clearly been overly used, on off. People have come up, pressed it off. The next person's done that, and also it raises questions of maintenance, repair, etc. But it's not a good sign. So what are we doing? And yes, at the fit out, at refurbishment of space, we can clearly start to think about these issues as well. This is a recent project that we've been involved in. There's not much that we can do in the way of natural light, but we've changed the artificial lighting internally. We put LED, good quality LED lighting in, increased the lux levels there with motion sensor control, and the vents are swirl diffusers to help prevent the dumping of air straight down, and we've also set parameters on the BMS control to reduce the temperature of air or stop air that's below a certain degree dumping straight down into that space. But these are, and this is picked up on some of the points that were discussed earlier. These are steps that can be made and taken, but there's no occupier in there. It has to engage with the occupiers. This was a at-risk fit-out. There's no one in it. It's to get new tenants into that space, and how the new tenants then use that space is really important. So I talk to a lot of people about health and well-being, and the regular question, the regular point that we often get is, it's difficult to measure, isn't it? It's almost impossible to measure. It's subjective. Now, John Alker from UKGBC raised this earlier, and yeah, I accept that it's difficult, but the other point that he made was it's harder than it should be. It shouldn't be difficult to measure. We know that if we measure and use that information, then it should help us progress and improve. There are lots of methodologies. I'm not going to talk about those in too much detail. You've got well-building standards through to the Leesman Index. I think what's most important is for organisations that are looking to improve health and well-being in their own space is to research, to understand what's out there, and to develop their own approaches based on the guidance and the information that we have. Well, why do we want it? Why? This is an important question. Some of you may recognise this. This is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Maslow was a psychologist and came up with the principle that to get to self-actualisation, to achieve what an individual can and is possible to achieve in their career, in their life, in happiness, they have to have the underpinning building blocks to get there. And down at the bottom is physiological. So these are food, water, shelter, clothing. Without that, you die, basically. But without the physiological aspects, you can't start worrying about safety and progress up this pyramid. If you're not familiar with this one, you may have seen that version floating around. It's certainly relevant to my children. But the point is, we need to take sight of this and think about this when we're helping and working with occupiers to improve the health and well-being of their space. In reality, where do I think we are? We're here. We provide safe, efficient, or hopefully efficient buildings to sit in. There's no real thought about love and belonging, and that has to come in partnership. But as we progress, if we progress up this pyramid, then we deliver building space, occupied space, that really will make a difference. What's stopping us? It's too expensive, isn't it? It's lack of understanding, and I think this is something that I would describe myself as a sustainability practitioner. I think lack of understanding across the industry. We have as a practitioner, we have a habit of using a lot of acronyms, a lot of terminology, and we've got to get away from this. We've got to create an agenda that is easy to explain, easy to understand. And then the third one is status quo. So you talk to occupiers, well, we've got our space, why should we move it? Why should we move the desks? Why should we think about engaging with the landlord, which is traditionally a bit of an adversarial relationship anyway? Well, I think all of these issues can be addressed. But what do we need to do? Well, we've got to understand our needs. We need to survey tenants. We need to assess the space. We need to utilise the best practice guidance and demystify, avoid confusion, and then develop a structure and an approach to take practical solutions forward. This was mentioned earlier. Again, this is from the UK GBC, and I'm going to take this slightly out of context on this. But the key point here is that this is almost a shopping list of what to look at, what to investigate. But again, the framework has to work. It has to sit within a structure. So John earlier described this as a framework. How do we get from these points here, these questions that you could potentially ask, how do we get from them to delivery of improvement? And we need a system, we need a cycle. So we need to identify, and this is probably familiar to a few of you, plan, do, check, act. We need to plan what we do, check it, review, act and improve continually. And it needs to be tailored, the approach needs to be tailored to meet the client's needs. So that's the approach. Back to me. Last week we moved to new offices, and we moved to the Hop Exchange in Southwark, so we've got a new office there, and we're quite excited about this change. It's a light area office. There's lots of natural light, but with blinds to control glare. Air conditioning is directly under our control. But for me, what's important about the space as well is it's exciting. It's a Grade 2 listed building. It's got interest. You walk into the building and there's stuff about it. And I think, there's a part of place there. You have external locations, lots of food, lots of pubs, places to go and enjoy ourselves after work. And that's part of the process. It's linking where you work with the wider environment. But we've not just moved in and thought that's it, we're in place. We surveyed our staff previous to moving out of our old office, which we'd outgrown, and we'll use the same survey after everyone's settled down, after the dust has settled, to see if there's been an element of change, and then use that information to practically take steps to address and improve. One final point. We talk a lot about offices. Health and wellbeing is important to everyone. It's important across the sphere of real estate, it's across the world to everyone. Not everyone works in offices. This was actually, I'm an ESOS, energy saving assessor, and I did an assessment of this industrial site, and they've done quite a lot. So those lights you can see up there, they're LED lights, but they've still got to think about health and wellbeing, and they've still got to think about the people working on site. So we shouldn't lose sight of that. So that's me. I think I'd just like to highlight, for those of you who don't know, really quickly, we are sustainability practitioners. We also operate a software platform and have a technical engineering solutions division as well. So thank you very much.